Coming up at New Day at Arirang. At the UN Climate Change Conference on Monday, President Moon Jae-in pledged before the global community that South Korea will cut its carbon emissions by 40% by 2030 from 2018 levels. As South Korea officially began its Living with COVID-19 scheme Monday, residents across the country expressed excitement as well as concerns over a massive spread. The country, meanwhile, is expected to report around 1,600 new infections today. And all three of the major U.S. markets reached intraday records Monday as investors maintained buying momentum ahead of this week's crucial meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Mark Broom. It's 8 a.m. Korea time on November 2nd here in Seoul, South Korea.
I'm Kim Mo-gan. As usual, we have a packed show for you over the next hour, and we'll be taking a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
We certainly will, and we're going to start with the coronavirus situation here in South Korea. Monday was the first day of the government's gradual transition back to normal life. Its so-called Living with COVID-19 scheme.
Yes, this means an easing of social distancing rules, including the removal of curfews for certain businesses. In Seoul and the wider capital region, gatherings will be allowed for up to 10 people and up to 12 in other regions.
So for more details, joining us in the studio for the remainder of this week is our Choi Won-jung. Welcome.
Morning.
We're all eager to find out exactly how the first day of this Living with COVID-19 scheme went, and I believe you're going to give us the details.
Of course. So like you said, yesterday was the first day of the Living with the COVID-19 strategy, and which gives many people and business some breathing room. The groups of more than 4 people were excited to be out on the streets and able to hang out past the previous 10 p.m. curfew. But some people were feeling hesitant about being out late despite the extended curfew. Take a listen to what they have to say.
I'm actually so used to the 10 p.m. curfew now. It doesn't feel much different, even if it is with COVID-19 now.
I think I'm going home at 10 p.m. tonight. I think a lot of people are going to be out releasing their pent-up energy, so I'm worried about a spike in infections.
So it seems like they're experiencing some, mixed emotions on this. What about business owners? What do they say?
So it has been almost a year since we saw the coffee shops and restaurants operate around the clock, but I do believe there are still worries and concerns over the potential surge. Take a listen.
I'm happy that there's no limit on business hours now, but it's hard because we already had to lay off so many staff. This is such short notice. I'm not sure how to deal with it.
And I also should point out that so-called vaccine passes were required for some businesses, meaning only fully vaccinated were allowed to use single-room saunas and gyms. And some of the businesses raised issues about the fairness of vaccine passes, but the health authority said this is inevitable to curb infections among the unvaccinated.
Yeah, we must point out that vaccinated people also get infected with COVID-19, these so-called breakthrough infections. But let's talk about projections for Tuesday's daily figure of new COVID-19 infections. Normally, we have to wait another hour or so for the official numbers, but how are the estimates looking thus far?
Just briefly, from midnight to 9 p.m., 1,323 cases were reported, 1,016 in the greater Seoul area, 307 in other regions. However, due to Halloween celebrations in some high population areas, the figure could change in next coming days. And also, the Korean Health Authority said on Monday the reproduction rate of the virus has been increasing currently at 1.3, while it was below 1 for the past 3 weeks. Now, if the rate goes above 1, it means more infections are expected. Oh, now that's a concern.
Well, I also think that, the authorities might be concerned about the possibility of the influence of the flu season.
Right, so the spread of the flu could be possible this year. So the things that previously prevented from the flu from spreading disappeared this year. So the Korean Health Authority said on Monday the flu spread seemed much lower last year due to strict mask wearing and hand washing and other personal hygiene measures. However, it's difficult to say whether it will spread widely, but the public have been urged to get the flu vaccine if possible.
Yeah, both my sons got their flu vaccine just the other day. But in regards to taking the flu vaccine and the COVID-19 vaccine on the same day, some people, especially the elderly perhaps, are worried about whether that might cause some extra complications.
Well, scientifically, I mean, you could get it at the same time. Scientifically, yes, but because the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine are a completely different type of vaccine. But some experts actually recommend getting them at the separate days just to track any possible side effect from flu vaccines or the COVID vaccines, so just to figure out what kind of vaccine, what kind of possible side effects coming from them. So
you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Won-jung, thank you so much for your coverage.
Of course.
It was very helpful. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Won-jung. Now, aside from South Korea, other countries across the Asia-Pacific region have also decided to start their own living with COVID-19 schemes.
And some, including Australia, are gradually opening their borders to international travelers. However, the major exception to that rule is China. Our Han Sung-woo with the details.
Australia is one of the countries which has started to ease its international border restrictions. On Monday, for the first time since the pandemic began, Australia started allowing its nationals to arrive from overseas, enabling many families to reunite with loved ones.
It feels really good. I'm actually here for my dad's funeral. So I've been trying to come home for a year and a half.
Millions of vaccinated Australians are also now free to travel internationally without a permit and are no longer required to quarantine upon arriving in the country. For now, travel is limited to Australian citizens, permanent residents, and their immediate families, but it sets in motion a plan to reopen the country to international travelers in the near future. Thailand, a country with an economy centered on tourism, has taken its policies a step further to bring in as many travelers as possible. From November 1st, the whole country is opening up to travelers who meet basic conditions. Fully vaccinated travelers from 63 approved countries or territories, like South Korea, China, the United States, Australia, and much of Europe, who test negative upon arrival can roam Thailand without quarantine. However, this is in stark contrast to China, whose borders are currently still mostly closed. Airline travel remains greatly reduced, and foreign students, along with tourists, are banned from entering. Chinese citizens and certain other foreign nationals can enter, but they must quarantine for at least 2 weeks upon arrival. CNN speculates that the upcoming 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics and the Chinese Communist Party's 20th Congress next year in November may be reasons for the prolonged hardline approach. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
For the first time on the global stage, President Moon Jae-in has revealed South Korea's ambitious carbon emissions reduction target. Giving a keynote speech at the UN Climate Change Conference on Monday, President Moon also pledged that South Korea will cut methane emissions and step up forestry cooperation with North Korea. Our Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji, who's traveling with the president, follows us this report from Glasgow.
At the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26, President Moon Jae-in pledged before the global community that South Korea will cut its carbon emissions by 40% by 2030 from 2018 levels. That's up from the previous target of 26.3%.
짧은 기간 가파르게 온실가스를 감축해야 하는 매우 도전적인 과제입니다. 쉽지 않은 일이지만 한국 국민들은 바로 지금 행동할 때라고 결정했습니다.
He said Seoul will also join global efforts to cut down on methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030 from 2020 levels, as part of the global methane pledge that officially launched at the COP26. Moon added that South Korea will lead efforts for reforestation and step up cooperation with North Korea on that front. Pyongyang's ambassador to the UK was present during Moon's speech, although they didn't have any contact.
나무를 키우고 산림을 되살리는 일은 기후위기 대응의 중요한 해결책입니다. 사막화를 막고 접경 지역의 평화를 정진시킬 수 있는 방안이기도 합니다. 아울러 남북한 산림 협력을 통해 한반도 전체의 온실가스를 감축해 나갈 것입니다.
The South Korean leader also reiterated efforts to completely do away with coal-fired power within the next 3 decades by closing down coal plants and halting funding overseas projects. He also vowed to lend a helping hand to developing countries based on South Korea's growth experience and by boosting official development assistance in green-related sectors. The president also proposed holding the Youth Climate Summit on a regular basis.
President Moon says zero emissions can only be achieved when everyone takes part, highlighting the need to involve the future generations in finding a solution to climate crisis and to speed up efforts toward a sustainable planet. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Glasgow.
Staying with COP26, world leaders and policymakers from some 200 countries who are meeting in Glasgow for the big UN conference on climate change are calling for urgent action. Starting the event, the Secretary General of the United Nations issued a grave warning to the international community. Kim Hyo-san has a wrap-up.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres opened the UN climate conference in Glasgow on Monday with a blistering warning over the world's failure to address global warming.
Our addiction to fossil fuels is pushing humanity to the brink. We face a stark choice. Either we stop it or it stops us. And it's time to say enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
Stressing that leaders need to listen to the planet and act now, the UN chief also called on them to revisit their climate targets, not every 5 years, but every year, as stipulated in the Paris Climate Agreement. Attending the conference, U.S. President Joe Biden assured the international community that the U.S. would stick to its promise of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the decade.
The United States will be able to meet the ambitious target I set in the Leaders' Summit in Climate back in April, reducing U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. We'll demonstrate to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example.
Saying more has to be done, President Biden blamed Russia and China for not showing up when it comes to tackling climate issues. China, the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that cause global warming, said President Xi Jinping will only be addressing the summit in the form of a written letter. While Beijing said last week it has no new significant goals to reduce emissions, Xi called for advanced countries to help developing countries respond better to climate change. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said it's 1 minute to midnight, calling for countries to get serious right now.
Humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
He also emphasized the role of the private sector, saying funding is needed to help developing countries decarbonize their economies. India, the world's third largest emitter of CO2, laid out its 5 goals, including reducing reliance on conventional fuels and switching to renewable energy. Other world leaders outlined their own climate commitments, sharing the view that urgent action is necessary. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
Countries at the UN Climate Conference are announcing updated plans on further cutting carbon emissions by 2030 with the ultimate aim of reaching net zero by 2050. It's a more ambitious goal than the one set in Paris in 2015. Lee Kyung-eun with the details.
Compared to the pre-industrial period around the 19th century, the average global temperature has risen by 1.2 degrees Celsius. With carbon emissions largely blamed for climate change, the UN adopted the Paris Agreement in 2015, the essential goal of which was to limit temperature increases to 2 degrees while aspiring for 1.5 degrees. But now the 1.5 degrees target has become the new commitment. Scientists are focusing on that half degree because its impact can be significant. According to a report by the UN, a 1.5 degree increase will cause sea levels to rise by up to 77 centimeters by 2100. That's enough to see Maldives submerged. But 2 degrees will bring up sea levels by another 10 centimeters, also putting low-lying coastal areas and deltas at risk. Also, the number of plants and insects that are losing their natural habitats will double or triple. And all coral reefs could disappear. That will inevitably affect fisheries, causing a decrease in the global annual catch of 3 million tons, compared to just half of that at 1.5 degrees. Also, malaria and dengue fever will expand their geographic range. And infectious diseases transmitted from animals to humans will increase as more wildlife deprived of habitat will come into contact with humans. The economy will also suffer, seeing median GDP per capita fall by 13%. The UN says the coming years will be crucial to keep the hope of 1.5 degrees alive, with carbon emissions needing to be cut in half by 2030 and net zero reached by 2050. So perhaps more important than the Paris Accord is this year's COP26 climate summit.
In order for us to achieve 1.5 degrees is to phase out coal. Plan around COP26 is actually on the slogan, the phrase, consigning coal to history, which is quite a striking moment, and that hasn't happened before in any of the COPs.
이경은, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to dig that little bit deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. As we've been reporting, President Moon Jae-in is in Europe this week. Over the weekend, he met with Pope Francis ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome. Now he's in Glasgow for that UN climate conference.
So how has he approached this trip, and has it been successful thus far? For more, we're joined by Professor Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, Professor of International Relations at King's College London. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Professor, President Moon Jae-in has been touting South Korea's ambitious plans to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. However, given South Korea's heavy reliance on fossil fuels, how do you rate the chances of that happening in less than 30 years?
Well, I think that South Korea has the potential to achieve its goals. If we look, for example, at European countries, they have been in Northern Europe, for example, they have been increasing the use of renewable energies at a very fast rate, something that we thought wouldn't be possible. And South Korea has the technology, has the potential partnerships with firms from other countries that would help it to achieve these goals. And I think right now there is the political will, because this is what the Korean people are demanding. So it will be very difficult for any future Korean president, including the one that will be inaugurated in May of next year, to back down, to move away from these goals. So I think this is something that the Korean people are going to demand from their leaders, and that Korea should be able to achieve.
Right, well, it doesn't really help matters much that we have China right on our next door step, and their leader, Xi Jinping, didn't even bother turning up in Glasgow, but hopefully South Korea can do what it can do. But President Moon insists his administration's Green New Deal can create jobs. Obviously, if this goes through, this will create well-paying jobs for a skilled workforce, but almost certainly at the expense of those currently working within the energy sector we have now. You touched on it briefly in your previous answer, but do you believe there is sufficient political will in South Korea to see his plan through, especially when there's so much going on, not only in South Korea right now, but around the world?
I think South Korea will have to implement a program to help those that will be losing their jobs. Some of them may be able to transition to some of these new jobs being created, engineers, for example. I do think, though, that if you look at the unemployment rate and even the youth unemployment rate, they are quite low. Youth unemployment rate is at its lowest since the Asian financial crisis. The unemployment rate has also been going down in recent years. So what we see here is that Korea could potentially suffer a shortage of these high-skilled workers that will be needed for the transition. So there will need to be a training process in universities with the support of research centers and the support of the private sector. So I do think there is the will there. I do think that some people will need to be retrained because inevitably they're going to lose their jobs. But more importantly, I think that South Korea really needs to train the next generation of engineers and other workers that are going to be driving this transition forward.
And also, Professor, during his trip, President Moon Jae-in met with Pope Francis, Presidents Biden and Macron and others to get their support for the Korean peace process. But as President Moon is leaving office early next year, can we expect some concrete outcome before he leaves office?
I think there is limited time. We are approaching the winter. I wouldn't expect North Korea, for example, to call for a summit in the middle of December or January. So the time is going to be limited before the March presidential election or before Moon leaves office in early May. So I think it is difficult. What it might be possible, though, is to resume some sort of dialogue at the working level between the two Koreas and to start a working level dialogue between the Biden administration and North Korea. So in a sense, the Moon government could be supporting, even leading these processes. But I do think that it will be up to the new South Korean president coming into office next year to really try to move peace in the Korean Peninsula forward. The time for Moon is very limited right now.
Yeah, a lot hinging on that election in March next year. And finally, Professor, before he returns back home to Seoul, President Moon is going to go to Hungary. While he's there, he's going to hold this summit with the so-called Visegrad 4 that also includes Poland, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. What do you think President Moon is trying to extract out of those countries with that meeting? And on the other side of things, what do you think the Visegrad 4 want out of Seoul?
Well, this is a very interesting visit because this is where most South Korean companies, especially the big chaebol, have been opening factories in recent years. So I would expect that President Moon is going to ask for political support, for example, in the form of tax breaks for the Korean companies that are continuing to open factories and offices across the region. He might also call for some support, for example, for Korean Peninsula peace, but I think most importantly in this particular visit is really the economics of it. And on the other side, very clearly they're going to be asking President Moon to go back to Korea and try to ask these companies to continue to invest in these countries. Obviously, the president cannot ask them to do so, but I think the visit will create a better political environment that will support further investment from Samsung, LG, Hyundai, really the big chaebol that are the main Asian investors in this part of Europe, even above China and above Japan. So they're crucial for the creation of jobs in Central Eastern Europe, especially in the V4 countries.
All right. That was Professor Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, Professor of International Relations at King's College London, on President Moon's trip to Europe. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, South Korea and the US reportedly kicked off a 5-day combined air exercise on Monday involving the mobilization of 100 air assets from both sides.
And according to Yonhap News, which cited military sources, F-15K and KF-16 jets are being used by Seoul and F-16s by Washington. The joint drill replaces Vigilant Ace, a larger exercise held every December that was suspended in 2018 to support diplomatic efforts for denuclearization and peace on the peninsula amid fierce opposition from North Korea.
Working with the US, South Korea is keeping close tabs on North Korea's military activity amid signs the regime is preparing for a follow-up to its recent test firing of a submarine-launched ballistic missile. The remarks were made by the Joint Chiefs of Staff on Monday in response to a report that showed satellite images of the North's Sinpo shipyard dated October 28th. It showed a mobile crane used to load missile canisters was recently moved next to a submarine. Also visible are a test barge with the cover removed from the ring mount, possibly to insert a missile canister. China has signalled that it will play a constructive role in achieving long-lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, including a declaration to formally end the Korean War that has been proposed previously by South Korea. This as the top nuclear envoys of Seoul and Beijing on Monday held virtual talks during which No Gyudok, Seoul Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, explained to his Chinese counterpart about Seoul's efforts to revive stalled inter-Korean talks. The Chinese envoy said Beijing will continue to work closely with the South when it comes to North Korea issues.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thank you very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we connect with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Last week, Facebook became Meta. Mark Zuckerberg, founder of the social media giant, announced the company's big move into the Metaverse, declaring the virtual world will be the successor of the mobile internet. But as Facebook replaces its iconic thumbs-up logo with a blue infinity sign, can the company appeal to the younger generation and also overcome the string of scandals and regulatory issues that it's embroiled in? We discussed this today with Stephen Fennick, editor of Tech Guide, and we also have Sarah T. Roberts, associate professor and co-founder of UCLA's Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. Thank you both so much for joining us. And well, let's kick things off first with you, Stephen. Now, Mark Zuckerberg, he announced this whole new Meta space. So what really is it? What is he envisioning with Meta? What kind of services do you think Zuckerberg's company is going to provide?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, it's a fairly large pivot for the company. Not only to have a name change, the parent company will have their name change. The social media platform will remain Facebook. But yeah, in terms of the Metaverse and their vision of the future, it is a virtual world that they're looking at, both virtual reality, augmented reality, and a new way to connect with people, to connect with family, to work collaboratively. It is, in his description, it's the next level of the internet. We've had the normal pic sharing, video was very popular, and now he thinks this is kind of the next step for the internet to take, so we can interact virtually with our colleagues, with our friends, our family. Virtual reality gaming is already very popular. The Facebook already owns Oculus, which is a virtual reality company that creates headsets. So there was already interest for some years in this new form of interaction. So I think that it is something that it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to take some time. Some of the technology required hasn't even been invented yet, but it is a very bold vision of the future.
It is indeed very bold, very exciting to hear about. But Sarah, amid the series of scandals that are currently surrounding Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's decision to change the parent company's name, it's also seen as a PR move and a bid to dodge some regulatory issues. How damaged would you say that the company is right now?
Well, it's hard to really get your head around the crisis that Facebook is in if you look at some common markers of the health of a firm. For example, Facebook's stock closed up 2% today, and it's not at its 52-week high, but it's certainly healthy in its trading capacity on the stock market. That having been said, Facebook is in the crosshairs of several difficult situations, the least of which has been the ongoing pressure from yet another whistleblower who has been revealing documents that suggest that not only may Facebook not be ready for what it's proposing in terms of the all-in nature of the metaverse, it can't get a handle on its problems today. So I think a cynic such as myself might note the timing of this unveiling of the new branding as being the thing that is taking headlines rather than the latest revelations from the Facebook whistleblowers. But the likelihood of Facebook's problems going away simply because of a rebranding, I think, is quite low, especially in the United States as we see the ascendance of new leadership in the Federal Trade Commission who have been vocal about their desire to pursue social media as a sector and Facebook in particular.
So you're quite pessimistic then about this whole rebranding strategy. I mean, what do you think it's going to achieve, Sarah?
Well, as my colleague pointed out, Facebook has owned Oculus for some time, and they've been trying to figure out how to make a go of that. Certainly, in order to fully experience the metaverse, you need to be using virtual reality goggles, and what better choice to make than Facebook's own product line, Oculus. So I think they're making strategic decisions here to integrate the entirety of their product line. But there are some extant problems that remain to be solved here. There are problems with content moderation, certainly won't go away. There are problems with the way that they are selectively governing around the world, and we learned recently have placed countries in different tiers in terms of how they deal with them. None of that is going to go away because of the metaverse. And just in a bigger picture, we've spent the last almost 2 years in a global pandemic when many workers have learned to function outside an office setting. How many of us really want to go back into a setting where we're in a faux office, except the surveillance is turned up to 11? I'm not sure how they're going to sell folks on that. I think they're going to be selling businesses on that who will then mandate participation to employees.
And on top of that, Stephen, Facebook has been going through something of a democratic crisis. The average age of Facebook users is estimated to be around 30 to 40 years of age, with a rapidly narrowing pool of users in their teens and 20s. Do you think this rebranding approach is going to help Facebook overcome this demographic dead end?
Absolutely. I think that is one of their goals with this change. You're right. Facebook has kind of become the not so cool platform that your parents use. The cool kids are on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. So it does need a little bit of reinvention, and maybe this will attract those savvy younger users who are always interested in the latest technology, which is also being tried and tested, by the way, by Apple. Apple is rumored to be releasing their own set of goggles as well to enable augmented reality and virtual reality. So it's going to be quite a rich playground if these other companies get involved, Facebook included. But absolutely, yeah, I think that Facebook is trying to package this as an attractive future, whereas personally, I think it's a little sad if the future is people sitting in dark rooms wearing goggles rather than interacting physically. But Facebook's vision is for people to collaborate when normally they weren't able to, and also to socialize when they weren't able to. And the pandemic certainly demonstrated how we could do that. But here, Facebook wants to do that in a richer and a more fun way of interacting.
So, Stephen, would you say that this is a good business move on Facebook's part?
Well, I think it's a gamble, most definitely. I think it's something that they're going to have to invest heavily into. We're talking billions of dollars, where the infrastructure and, as I mentioned before, the technology that will support this hasn't even been thought of yet. It's very easy to come up with a plan, but very hard to execute to really make those visions real. So whether A, the technology exists, and B, whether people are going to be willingly moving into these virtual spaces is something we're yet to see. The internet really changes. The characteristics and the trends of the internet change so rapidly. It could very well be the most popular way to connect, or on the downside could be a way that people would avoid in the future.
And well, Sarah, as Stephen has mentioned, it's going to take billions of dollars of investment into Metaverse to really make it work for Facebook or Meta. And well, the company has actually dedicated around $10 billion to setting up this virtual world, and it's also planning to employ thousands of people in Europe. Would you call this a necessary or wise business move?
Well, as a Facebook skeptic, I question the wisdom of this move when so many other problems are unresolved with Facebook. And as my colleague said, we know that other companies are pushing strategies in a similar space, such as Apple. But there are going to be issues of market differentiation that come down to other issues beyond the technology. For example, Apple is coming out very strongly in the case of protecting user privacy. We know Facebook, unfortunately, has been not only lax in that arena, but it has business models predicated on extracting user activity and demographic information, which they then sell or profit from. So what are the protections for users that will be put in place in the metaverse? These things are undisclosed or unknown at this time. Certainly the European market is aggressive with its regulation. And so I anticipate that they will be preparing a strategy to respond to the very kinds of questions that I've raised, but that will come from those empowered in a much greater way than I am when asking those questions.
Right, so these regulatory, these societal concerns are now going to be very much part of the user experience, in your opinion, in pursuing these new futuristic strategies. And well, also, Stephen, for years, Mark Zuckerberg, he's been mentioning the importance of building Facebook's own platform. As Facebook and Instagram, they rely on platforms by Apple and Android. Now, if Zuckerberg wants to make a success out of the Meta business model, then is this something he's going to have to get a quick move on?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that anyone will tell you that the best ideas should have been started yesterday. And so I'd say their moves are definitely in place. But it's going to be a challenge because I think Facebook can't do this on their own. Sarah mentioned earlier about, and I mentioned about Apple being involved with their glasses, and then they're also wanting for there to be an environment where those products are going to be useful. So I think that Facebook on its own is going to struggle. I think they really need to create an environment for developers and for users that will be attractive, to make it so that it is a safe environment. Sarah also mentioned the whole problems of Facebook aren't going to go away just because you're wearing a pair of goggles. It will have to address those issues seriously as well, but also have the cooperation of other companies. Apple, as we've also mentioned, are all about privacy. Their app tracking technology now allows users to stop their data being tracked, and that's costing companies like Facebook billions of dollars right now. So I think that sort of cooperation, where they're all singing out of the same hymn book, that's going to be something they're going to have to seriously address if this is going to be any type of success.
So whether it's this futuristic vision or the user concerns surrounding it, it looks like the whole ecosystem is going to have to move here. And well, Stephen, is it going in one direction? Is Metaverse the future of social media?
Well, I'd say that's very hard to predict right now. I think there are already very successful platforms we're seeing, like TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram seem to be enjoying great success. Whether people want to change that, whether they're willing to invest in the technology and even the products that are required to do this, and the outcome that they'll get from this, whether it will make them feel closer to their friends and family, make them work a little bit better and more collaboratively. I think that's going to be that will be known when we see the quality of the metaverse and how realistic and how well and how good the experience can be.
And Sarah, before we go, what are some deeper management issues that you hope to see Meta and other social media companies address really to clean up their image?
Well, my concern with products like the metaverse and other efforts to push the social activity on these platforms into private quarters is that the firms believe themselves to be able to get out of the business of content moderation, which is, of course, a great concern for them at any given time. I'm not sure that this is going to do all that. There are other considerations as well, infrastructural considerations, cost to users, the expectation that users be able to purchase these goggles, have access to bandwidth that will allow this kind of content streaming, computers that can process it, and so forth. I mean, there's no mistaking the reason for a company like NVIDIA to want to be involved in the metaverse, because this is all going to require churning graphics processing units and upgrading your computer. So there are a lot of issues here that we can presage, but there are many that will come to the fore as this product rolls out. I think it's worth remembering that metaverse was a term coined in a 1992 dystopian cyberpunk novel by Neil Stephenson, and it's funny that that the folks in Silicon Valley can't get away from these terms that have already been coined, but that were coined as harbingers or as warnings to folks. So I got to tell you, after this conversation, I'm going to take a walk outside.
Well, it looks like we all need to have a deep think about the future of these social media companies, and so considering that, and also consider that it doesn't just take rebranding to change the deeper issues at hand. Well, that was Stephen Fenwick, editor of Tech Guide, and Sarah T. Roberts, associate professor and co-founder of UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
You.
All three of the major U.S. benchmarks ended with closing record highs on Monday as investors maintained buying momentum ahead of this week's crucial meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee. The Dow Jones Industrial Average finished up 0.2% at 35,913. The S&P 500 a 0.25% higher at 4,613, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq adding over 0.6% to 15,595. The meeting is set for Tuesday and Wednesday, and they may reveal the details of how the Fed will taper the stimulus bond purchases that started last year. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell has indicated the pullback will be complete by the middle of next year, with rate hikes likely to follow shortly after. The stock market also rallied as companies' quarterly earnings have been solid despite supply chain issues.
Now, closer to home for the next couple of weeks, big bargains are to be had all around South Korea on everything from fashion to travel, even food at traditional markets. It's the Korea Sale Festa, an event held now for several years, but this year's edition has extra emphasis on achieving a way to boost the ailing retail economy, and more businesses are taking part than ever before this time around. Chen Min-jung with the details.
South Korea has kicked off its biggest yet annual sale campaign, dubbed the Korea Sale Festa. The two-week event is the latest effort to boost domestic consumption amid the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, the shopping sale is focused on empowering people through heartwarming consumption.
Companies, small business owners, the self-employed, and those at traditional markets have sacrificed a lot while abiding by virus prevention measures. I'm delighted that this event comes at the perfect time to help them.
More than 2,000 companies and 17 regional governments are taking part in the nationwide event. This is the largest number since the first event was held in 2016. Here at this department store, 25 small and mid-sized companies are offering discounts on a variety of items, from health products to cosmetics. A total of 500 companies will take part in the Festa in department stores nationwide. One business owner taking part says it is more than just a marketing tool.
It's a difficult period, not only for small business owners, but also for small and medium-sized companies. But this event allows us to extend our market and boost sales.
The sales campaign is a great opportunity for consumers as well. Major supermarkets are providing up to 50% discounts on purchases, and traditional markets are holding giveaway events for shopping bags. Bargains are available online as well, with online shopping malls selling some products at 70% off. Electronics companies are running promotions for their best-selling products, and fashion and cosmetics brands are offering large discounts. There are also special deals on larger items like furniture and even cars. While shoppers will be keen to visit malls and stores, authorities are stressing the importance of following virus prevention measures while shopping. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. American Airlines canceled nearly 850 more domestic and international flights on Sunday due to staffing shortages and unfavorable weather. The latest wave of flight cancellations pushed the total to over 1,700 since Friday. According to a company spokesperson, the airline canceled more than 16% of its daily total on Sunday alone. In a letter to employees on Saturday, the company said severe winds at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport reduced arrival capacity by more than half, while also noting that they will begin to run tight on staff as crew members end up out of their regular flight sequences. Airlines overall have been running on reduced staffing due to the pandemic, which drastically lowered demand for air travel. However, with restrictions being lifted, airline travel is ramping up, resulting in further staff shortages. American Airlines announced over the weekend that nearly 1,800 flight cabin crew members would return from leave starting Monday, while more than 600 new hires will be coming on board by the end of the year. 2 people were killed and another dozen others injured when shots were fired at a Halloween house party in Illinois. Unfortunately, the incident was just one of at least 11 mass shootings the U.S. reported over the Halloween weekend. According to data from Gun Violence Archive, deadly violence over the weekend left at least 12 people dead and 52 others injured. Mass shootings are often defined as incidents where 4 or more people are killed or wounded by gunfire. Such shootings were also reported in Colorado, Kentucky, Texas, California, Florida, and Oklahoma. Data also show that the number of mass shootings in the country increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. This year alone, 599 mass shootings have been reported, while 611 were reported in 2020 and 417 in 2019. Experts say the increase in mass shootings during the pandemic is consistent with the notion that violence may be influenced by social and economic factors. Archaeologists have discovered what they believe is the oldest industrial wine press in northern Iraq, dating back more than 2,700 years. The discovery coincides with a vast increase in wine demand among the ruling imperial elite of Assyria. Wine is known to have been consumed in various ceremonial practices among the rich at the time. The latest discovery also includes 14 installations carved into mountain rocks, where the upper square-shaped basins were used by people to press grapes underfoot while extracting the juice, which ran off into the lower circular basins. The historic site was discovered by a group of Italian archaeologists working on adding the ancient structure to the UNESCO World Heritage List. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Hope you're well dressed up for a chillier morning. Lows are only about a couple degrees lower, but it feels a lot colder. And over in Daegwallyeong, it's down to freezing again this morning. But afternoon readings will go up as high as yesterday under mostly sunny skies, and we'll be seeing a similar weather pattern on Wednesday. And today's air quality will be normal to good across Korea, except in Chungcheongbuk-do province and Daegu, where levels of fine dust could rise during the first half of the day. And it's another foggy morning in inland regions, and Daejeon and Daegu are starting the day at 7 degrees Celsius. Then highs in the south will be a couple of degrees lower today, hovering around seasonal norms. Daegu and Jeju will be going up to 19 degrees this afternoon. Well, this Sunday marks Ipdong, the beginning of winter, and rain on that day will bring wintry conditions to the country from next week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back on the same time tomorrow. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. I'll be back in around an hour from now with our next newscast. It's coming up at 10 a.m. Korea time. But in the meantime, stay tuned to Arirang TV, and we'll see you at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.
중심으로 강강 쏠래